Hey folks, so I'm going to be setting up an open terrarium. I already placed some peat moss. I placed a very thin layer. I didn't place too much because these plants already have soil and that's going to add to it. I found a selection of rocks, and I also have another terrarium which I recently rejuvenated, and I want to take a trimming of the Begonia foliosa to add to it. And I have a liverwort. It had dried up. I forgot to water it yesterday, but I just did. Hopefully it will revive. And a Pilea depressa, which it was growing down when I had the Pilea in a tray of water, so I went ahead and took a cutting, and this cutting will make a nice addition to the terrarium. So before we start, let us look at the rocks that I have. So I found this rock, and all these rocks can fit in the opening. And then there were different colors, so I'm not sure which color will look best in there just yet. Oops, and I bumped into the tripod. So I have these rocks. I'll go ahead and lay them out. I want to make sure I don't get the rock scratching the glass. So this is the assortment I have for my pool at the moment in which to add to the terrarium. So now I'm going to put them up just because they take up less space piled up in the container. And I didn't add these back in just right, but they'll be okay. So now what I need to do is decide how I'm going to lay out the terrarium. This Marcgravia is pretty large, so it's growing tall, but it's really a carpeting plant, so I'm not quite sure how I'll do that. I think I might put the Begonia foliosa and the Begonia lichenora towards the back as backdrop plants. So I'm going to start with the backdrop. So I'm going to start with the Begonia lichenora. Don't you like this brown painter's tape that the seller had it packaged in? What's nice about painter's tape over masking tape, it peels a little more easily, which really helps when you want to basically remove the plant. You know, it needs to be packaged in a way that the plant doesn't get damaged as much. You know, they will damage a little bit in shipping, but you also want to make sure it doesn't get damaged trying to pull it out of the way it was packaged. So I feel like the seller did a really good job. I like to save these labels, and I basically have them as references. And you know, these arrived last week. I see like maybe a little mold appears to grow there. I'm not sure if that is mold or not, but I'm going to keep it away just to be on the safe side. Keep it away from the plant. And go ahead and remove the other one. There we go. I see that he also added some cardboard, which is nice. It's grown in some moss, so that moss is going to add another layer of carpeting. You know, as it spreads, it will look nice on the surface of the terrarium. So now what I need to do is pull it out, which he has it grown in sphagnum moss, and I have peat moss in there, which is basically composted sphagnum, so this is going to do well in there. Now the Begonia lichenora, a lot of people will sell it as Begonia sarawak and say it has larger leaves than the lichenora, and I don't know if that's true or not. It seems like maybe if it's grown in the right environment, the leaves will be a little bigger. You know, a lot of plants take on different forms based on the environment they're growing in. The most pronounced example are aquatic plants that are typically grown terrestrially, and then when stuck in an aquarium they will take on aquatic leaf forms versus terrestrial. But the environment will affect the way the plant looks. So this plant is more of a trailing plant, and the Begonia foliosa is more of a miniature bushy cane type begonia. So I'm actually going to go ahead and take a segment of here. Now the piece that's hanging in the front over the Pilea that I have in here, the watermelon begonia, that's the one I'm going to cut first. So this one is the one I'm going to trim. I don't want to over trim this terrarium because I do want that plant to be a little bushier, but I also don't want to keep all these pieces that are not growing in the right manner that I want. So here we have it. Whoops. Well, we had. So here we have it. And you see how I do have some roots on it right there and a piece of cotton from when I revived it. So I can set this down and then hopefully I'll get new shoots growing up, because sometimes with plants, when you grow them horizontally, and they typically have a vertical habit, you can get new branches to grow, and that's a good way to get more branches by which to propagate. Now, if you look at the way this is curved, I want to make sure I plant it in the back curved so it goes along the shape of the glass and not like that. So I'm going to hold it like this, where I can, when I go down, if I hold it this way, it's going to be straight down, but if I turn the tongs, then the flat edge will be parallel to the bottom, and this way, oh, it's still dropped. It's a good way to get it in there, but these are not quite long enough for such an endeavor. So it's going to be a little tricky to do, but once it's implemented, it will be fine. And oops, and there we go. But it's right against the glass. I want to move it a little up from the glass. Now this peat moss is quite dry, so I will have to water this, but I wanted to make sure I had enough soil from these first before I watered them. So I have that piece which is going to give me a little cluster, small cluster in the back. Not too much. I think I'll probably put the lichenora on this side. So I don't know if that ball can fit in there, and yes it can. So I'm just going to drop it in. There we go. And all this moss on the surface I'll tend to later, but I want to spread the sphagnum moss, so I'm going to just break it apart. Oops, I'm going to have to clean the surface, but there we go. I should have broken it before I stuck it in there, but also I should have. So now you guys are learning what not to do, but some people probably prefer to stick it in still regardless. It just, everyone has their own style and own way, but it doesn't flatten as easily, but it's getting there. It's going to add a little bit of contour, so then it's not a perfectly flat terrarium, but there will be some elevated regions, so it will actually not be too bad. So I want to make sure the lichenora is going to stay in a good spot. And as you can see, this segment is upside down, so I'm going to have that wind around the front. I'm going to move it right side up. And I really hope this thing can grow in a manner that will really accentuate the iridescence of the plant. Now this one might be a little too big. And you see this leaf that broke off the lichenora? I don't know if I can propagate a trailing begonia from a leaf like I can with Rex begonias and with rhizotomous begonias, but sure worth trying. If anything, it might root like a cane begonia without producing any stems. And this one, the soil was dry, And the Marcgravia, I'm actually going to hold off on putting it in at the moment, because one issue is the Marcgravia is a plant that does not like to have water on the leaves, from what I read online. So when I put it in there, I want to make sure it's going to be in a place that it will be happy. And I want to water this before I put it here. But the Begonia lichenora, I'm actually going to stick it in the peat moss. It will help it root better and faster. And also when I'll put the Marcgravia, I'm guessing in this area, and this is now higher up, and I can raise it up on the peat moss if I have to. So that's how it will look. So I'm going to go ahead and determine which stone I want to use. And these two are kind of nice because they're roughly the same shade. These two are kind of nice, but they're roughly the same shade as well. And then this one's on its own. So I really kind of think the bigger ones are going to look better in this setup. So these can be saved for another project down the road. And now I have to determine. I like how you have a vein in here. That adds a nice oomph to it. I think this like that will look nice. Now the trick is to get it in there without dropping and risk breaking the glass. I don't know how I'll do that, but that's how. Ah, yes, excellent. So I'm going to put this over there. And then this one, nope, make sure I have a good grasp of it. I can always turn it around differently when it's in there. That one I'm going to put more like here. Nope, I'm going to put it more like there. This will be interesting. So now I do want to plant a few other things. So I'm going to go ahead and plant the Pilea depressa. Oh, went right in. And I want to plant it in the bag. If it gets buried by the Marcgravia, I'm not going to worry, because the leaves that will grow up and out will provide a nice back. But you see how it's curling up and everything? I actually want to take this and cut that piece into its own plantlet, and I can actually trim this and set them horizontally. And this way, when they grow, I'll have them next to each other, and they can produce a nice like cluster all together. And I'm just going to set it down. The plant will eventually follow the light and grow upright. It will accommodate. As you can see here, this was a horizontal segment, and now you have new plantlets growing up, or branches that you can cut. So if you're propagating plants, that's a good way to get more plants. But let me get this in a manner that will be easier to stick in there. There we go. Okay. And then the liverwort, we'll stick that in the front. I may look for an isopod and stick it in there sometime. Might not be nice having the liverwort growing on a rock, but it will be nice when that spreads and when the moss also spreads down over the rock. And it will look really nice. So now what I'm doing is getting some water. And for this project, I'm just going to use a little distilled water. I don't have to in this terrarium because it's not like a carnivorous plant terrarium, and I'm growing it strictly in peat moss because the Marcgravia is obviously growing in a different media. But by squirting the rock, it rolls down, and the peat moss has to get a little wet before it starts wicking up more water. And it does float, so you don't want to keep putting water in there because it will float and you think you need more, but you don't. So keep that in mind. I'm going to get a few things out of the way because this Marcgravia I have a feeling it's going to make a slight mess. So I'm just moving a few things out. Straighten this a little. There we go. And now I'm going to try and open this bag and see how it is. This terrarium container, I originally had intended on making it into a lamp, but then I realized it is not practical because the way the top tapers out versus in, I can't use it for a lamp because I'll typically get a rubber stopper with a hole in it or drill a hole in the center, and that's how I'll make a lamp, and then I'll have the cord come out the side so I can still have whatever I wanted inside. This Marcgravia is a lot bigger than I thought. Now I have like gunk on this. Oh, they hand wrote this label as opposed to a printed label like the other one. Interesting. Maybe they just started printing things and that was a previous one. But this one came really dry, and they wanted to make sure that the moisture isn't going to get on it in shipping and kill the plant. So I'm going to have to make sure when I water the terrarium, I'm not going to get this wet, because even though this is an open terrarium, it's going to stay wet for a while. Wow, those are really large pieces of perlite. I didn't know you can buy it that big. So you see how these, from the humidity, they already get some nice roots. Oh, these are really long. How am I going to plant this? Wow. I'm going to take it off the soil. Take all that off. I'm guessing it needs really airy soil, which is why they did that. So this terrarium, it's probably going to be a little moist, but not... I'm going to have to make sure I don't get it really wet, because this is my first Marcgravia, and I'm not fully experienced at cultivating it, so it's going to be a learning curve for me. You know, a lot of plants get easy once you learn what they need, but you want to make sure that you're not going to kill your beloved plants, especially when you spend a fortune on them. But this looks kind of nice the way it is, that this really long segment I want to cut. So I'm going to take this and cut it from there. If I can find a good spot. Okay. So this grew really long and tall. Oops, and I'm burying the begonia, so I'm going to have to take this and put it elsewhere for now. And this is going to look nice crawling over the rock, but I do need to put a little bit more planting media back there. I don't know if I can propagate the leaves of the Marcgravia. So this looks like a very peat-based potting soil mixed in with small and large perlite, but this is going to be hard to dump soil in there, so I'm going to go get something. One thing that really helps out, these bottles, when you have a cold and you take like cough syrup and stuff, they can fit in these and they work really well, unless you have like a really long spoon that has a good cup portion of it. So what I'm going to do first is pat down the roots a little. Then I'm going to take the cup, hold it like that, get it in there, and then put it on that top portion and just dump it in. And that will actually do, I have to do it a few times. It's hard to dump everything out at once, but I just do it as many times as I need. I don't know if I really want all these coarse pieces in there, but I don't know what I'll do with them outside here, so I'm going to keep the coarse pieces in there because they might help out the roots. And if I bury the Pilea depressa in the back, at least it's not, it will help them grow through all this. So I'm going to put a little more, and then I can pile it down the side, or run it down the side, and it will look nice. There we go, I have all of it dumped from this load. And now I can smooth it out a little. One thing I don't like about perlite is that it will scratch the inside of terrarium, so you have to be very careful with it. But you know, in the terrarium it's not really moving anywhere. But I'm going to try to get a little back there. That worked. And this piece, I can cut it into smaller segments and get it a lot thicker in there, but I kind of enjoy watching these things thicken a little more. I do not see any of the Pilea depressa, so I'm actually going to get this, play around in the back to get the pieces up. There's one, and there. They're all covered in dirt, but they're still alive, and they'll establish. And hopefully the moss from the Begonia lichenora will go to the back and cover all the perlite so the terrarium can look nice. And I'm going to stick this back over here so I can get the Begonia foliosa, and then the Pilea will, I'm going to move it over. So that's going to look nice. I have two pieces there. And now I can wait and watch this thing establish, although it will need a little more water. And I do need to put a little more dirt back behind the Marcgravia. So the tricky part is watering this without getting it on the Marcgravia, so that's what the beauty of the squirt bottle. As you see, I'm watering it without getting it on the leaves. If you do get some on the leaves, it's not the end of the world, but it will, you know, I don't know how long it takes to kill much water to kill the leaf. But that's just what I read online. I haven't yet experienced it for myself until I get more experience with this. So I'm going to leave this with that much water for now. And we get to see the finished product. So this is how it looks at the moment. The Marcgravia crawling over the rock looks really nice. At least I think so. The Begonia lichenora is a little messy, but it is a creeping type of begonia that has that growth habit that's not as tidy as the Marcgravia. And once the Begonia foliosa starts to grow and the Pilea depressa and if the liverwort starts to take over in the front, it's going to look nice. So what's nice about this versus putting all fully grown plants and trying to work so hard to get it tidy is that it's just fun seeding the terrarium and watching it establish. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative and enjoyed the different plants I used. Thanks for watching and happy planting.